Hello and welcome to Answers in Reason. The freshest fresh air sci-fi show. Psyched. I'm Luke, and I'm also called the Bearded Heretic, which is what's on my screen. And it is me. It is me in the chat. I can confirm that it is me in the chat. I am the one that is communicating with you all through Answers and Reasons YouTube. I have access now. He's given me access to steal all of his information and put it out to the world. So prepare to be doxxed, Joe. Just kidding. I would never do that. I see. I see. Lone Wolf is already trying to. What's the word? Derail the conversation before it's even started, talking about DMT and Lone Wolf. I think there is actually a stream there to have out on. And also, just to say, I'm also on a worse camera. That's because my Mac cannot handle streaming right now, so I'm going to try and figure that out. I think I just need to delete a bunch of files, and then I'll be back on a Mac with the good camera. But hopefully you can all hear me. Hopefully you can all see my beautiful face in this different kind of lens, and you get to see a bit more of my office space, which looks a bit tidier in the camera that shows less of it. But as you can see, I've got a bunch of stuff just stacked on top of the bookshelf. The color coordination was not done by me. It's done by my partner. So there we go. So it's nice to see you all here. We have a few people. We have Lone Wolf, we have Jovial Dane, and we have Stacey K. Nice to see you all here. Welcome. Thank you for joining. Hopefully we'll get a few more people joining us a bit later on. I apparently can't run Restream and YouTube at the same time, which is why I've had to use Joe's handle through Restream. So that's why Joe might turn up and start talking as air as well, and it'll be confusing for all of us. Lone Wolf says, we all know that shrinks are secretly acid heads. Potentially, but more so probably the psychoanalytic people. I can imagine those people doing a few. So there we go. Right, today is called On the Borderline, and we're going to be talking about a particular disorder called borderline personality disorder. And the reason I thought this would be good is largely because it's been brought up in the media quite a lot recently due to the Amber Heard Johnny Depp case. I'm not going to go into that case at all. I have a lot of opinions about it, but I figure opinions are for geeks, and that's not what the show is about. It's about educating people on different things, and that's for lawyer channels and stuff like that. And I've been on a few shows with Claire S. Bear, if you want to see my breakdowns of things that are going on in that case. But I'm going to try and keep it apolitical in this as much as possible, and just talk about the disorder and what it means, where it comes from, what it looks like. And I think the most important thing for me is talking about how someone with borderline personality disorder can be helped by other people and help themselves, because it is a very destructive disorder in a lot of ways. It causes a lot of chaos in someone's life, for them and for the people around them. And that's what this is all about. It's all about trying to help people to become educated on these areas, throw in a few things that are a bit more interesting, and break it down to the basics. So I think let's get started, guys. If you do have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat box. Like and subscribe to Answers in Reason, because they have a lot of stuff around philosophy, a lot of stuff about religion, philosophy of religion, stuff like that, which is really interesting. Philosophy of mind, which I find particularly interesting. And they're great guys. They're fun. I am here alone today, but we will be getting guests on in the future. I'm going to make sure of that, just to make sure that you don't get bored of me for the hour and a half, 2 hours that you have to spend with me. So that'll be good for the future. So yeah, like, subscribe, all of that YouTube stuff. I'm not very good at the YouTube stuff. I keep getting told off by Joe that I'm not putting the the plan in early enough. But hey, I'm learning. I just got to get used to his mindset and his way of doing things on his channel. But yeah, let's get started. So borderline personality disorder. It's now called in the UK emotionally unstable personality disorder, and I think if you keep that in the back of your head, that's a really good way of describing it. It is emotional instability, and we'll go into more detail about that. But before we do, I kind of want to talk about the history of it, because it wasn't that long ago, 1950s, there was a psychologist called Cleckley. Now, he's a psychologist who, if anyone's done like A level or like kind of that level, so 17, 18 years old kind of level of psychology qualification, you might remember him from Thigpen and Cleckley, where he kind of brought forward the idea of what's now called dissociative identity disorder was called multiple personality disorder back then. So that's where somebody has like multiple personalities. Now he kind of created that, but he kind of talks about all these different personality disorders, and it's it's interesting to see what he thinks of it at the time, because a lot of all that stuff was covered under psychopathy. Now, the reason for that was because psychopathy back then was just a psychopathology. It was a shortened down version of that phrase, essentially. And the idea was that somebody presented with what looked like mental illness, but had none of the characteristics of mental illness. So no delusions, no hallucinations, no depression, no anxiety, no hysteria. Back then, hysteria was like this thing that they gave. They said any female that was acting outside of normal parameters had hysteria. So it's a very sexist term, hysterical hysteria. But essentially had none of these features, but would continuously be admitted to psychiatric units or go to prison, would consume a lot of substances and all this stuff. And it was like, there's a book called Mask of Sanity, which is a very good book, which basically talks about this psychopathology, the psychopathy, they called it. And when I was reading it, I was reading some of the case studies, and the case studies were really interesting because they talk about these people that like would end up like kind of becoming, I don't know, like have attachment issues. They'd have this fear of abandonment. They'd cause chaos in their life. Their families wouldn't be able to manage it. They'd be in and out of these institutions. And it reminded me of the work I did when I worked on a mental health unit, when I worked with people with emotionally unstable personality disorder. And some of the other case studies reminded me of other people who had antisocial personality disorder. And so it really kind of shows you that these things have been issues for a long time. It's not recently that we've just discovered this personality disorder, but the kind of approaches they were trying to take back then were pretty similar to what we do today. So the treatment and the support support provided around personality disorder is still wanting, and that's kind of the reason I want to discuss it, because by learning how we can support people who have personality disorder, we can be better ourselves and help these people, because a lot of the things that they encounter, not no fault of their own, but it's the way that their personality is developed throughout their life. So just a brief description of what borderline personality disorder is, or emotionally unstable personality disorder. The core feature of it is a really irrational and strong fear of abandonment. And it's not like a little thing of like, oh, what if, like everyone has these imaginary scenarios where, their best friend might reject them, or their partner might leave them, or something like that. Everyone has those. It's more visceral than that. It's more potent, and it kind of causes people to act in a very unusual way. So they might use what we would regard as manipulative tactics in order to keep someone with them. They might self-harm, for instance, to cause that person to care for them. They might become so overwhelmingly stressed about this person abandoning them that they actually become aggressive towards them. Hi, John from America. John from, sorry, not from. Nice to see you here. I'll look at your message in a sec. And they might do these tactics that we would consider just completely irrational. We can't see the link between why this person is doing it and the outcome. But it is actually quite effective. If you have people who are strongly adverse to abandonment, it might work for them. But the problem is, it also has the adverse effect where people do end up leaving because they become overwhelmed by their behavior. They become overwhelmed by the 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 hours of crying. They become overwhelmed with the angry behavior. Because the other side of this is that people with emotionally unstable personality disorder really struggle to regulate their emotions. Now, there is um, neurological evidence that suggests that their limbic system, which is like the fear um, aspect of the brain, so the amygdala is part of that, and then there's other parts. The hippocampus are part of that as well, where it gets triggered, and then we go into a fight, flight, freeze, appease response. Our defense mechanisms when something is going wrong. And there's evidence to suggest that actually the cause of that somebody with emotionally unstable personality disorder is triggered easier in that way to negative stimuli. So we might encounter a situation where we become a bit stressed, and we would have like a bit of an anxiety response, and we'd work through it quite easily. Whereas somebody with emotionally unstable personality disorder can't work through that, and they become so stressed that their fight, flight, freeze response is triggered, and then they end up either flighting, flighting, fleeing, or freezing in those situations more so. Um, and that is really kind of like what leads to all these kind of like very kind of big situations, these chaotic situations where people are crying for hours on end, and they're trying to essentially keep people in their lives. So that's the thick and thin of it. That's a very brief description of it, um, and it can lead to quite problematic behaviours over a long period of time, where people become sectioned under the Mental Health Act or whatever they have in America, um, repeatedly, maybe for long periods of time. The first time I worked on the ward, one of the people that I worked with there had already been in hospital for a year, and then didn't get discharged for another 9 months after I joined. So they were in hospital for almost 2 years because of their personality disorder, and it was quite it was quite severe in their case. They were at risk of potentially ending their life by accident, essentially. Because the big thing um, with personality disorder as well is that um, I don't want to minimize the attempts that they have, but oftentimes they'll use suicide as a way of drawing people back in, because it's such an extreme way. If they think they're going to be abandoned, it's such an extreme way. It's such an extreme thing that people will come to them. Because people, regardless of however they felt in the past, um, if they say, "Oh, I'm going to kill myself," then they feel like someone's going to come back to them. And this may not be a conscious thought process, but it's certainly the underlying process that happens underneath it. Um, and so they'll set up these things where they will maybe take an overdose, or they'll do something like that, and then they'll tell people. Um, and I don't like the phrase "cry for help," and I don't like the phrase "attention seeking," because I think they have negative biases associated with them. It's kind of more than that. It's not just that they want attention. It's more that they want to feel cared for. They want to feel loved. They want to feel um, uh, like somebody is there for them, and they don't feel that way. They feel like people are just going to leave them, and so they need to take these drastic measures in order to keep people there. So it's more than just attention seeking. It's not just this simple kind of like, oh, they're just looking for attention. And I think if anyone has those thoughts in their head that people use suicide attempts in that way, try and get rid of it, because if you really drill down into it and you think about it, that is not a normal way. That's such an extreme measure that there has to be something really wrong there for that to be the way that they're doing that. So try and be a bit more empathetic about that, I suppose. Just going to get to some comments quickly. This is John from America. I can't, you're making me say it with a weird voice. I never liked psychology. It seemed to be the most subjective type of field when it comes to science, in my personal opinion. Have you seen sociology? If you haven't, look up sociology because it's way more subjective than psychology. And yeah, sociology is a bit more like that. I think psychology has the benefit of neuropsych on its side, but saying that as well, all of the behavioral stuff and all of the social stuff does have scientific backing. The problem is interpretation, and you're right there. Interpretation sometimes does have subjectiveness to it. So I agree with you to a certain point. John also says, I think there are two types of insanity. One form is an individual being unaware or detached from external reality, and the other form is individual being detached from other perspectives of reality. That's interesting. I think I see where you're coming from. I think that kind of links to something that we have in psychology, which is neurotic and psychotic. So you have neurotic disorders, which are more like depression, anxiety, where somebody is not detached from reality, but has a certain perspective of it. And that perspective doesn't necessarily match reality, but it's not that they're detached from it. It's just that their perception of it is skewed or biased in a way unconsciously. And then psychotic is where they are detached from reality and they're perceiving things that aren't there and believing things that don't exist. So it's not about the perception; it's about the reality is detached from their experience. Yeah. So that kind of links. That's good. And Lone Wolf says, I keep trying to tell people that I have borderline personality disorder, but they just tell me it's all in your head. Stop obsessing, and life goes on. Do you feel like you have borderline personality disorder, Lone Wolf? Or is that meant to be a joke? Because I'm not sure. I don't know. I don't know with you. Tell me more. Tell me more, because I will be able to potentially help you out, or help you to understand what that feeling is. Or if it's a joke, just tell me, and I can try and figure out the joke because I don't get it. I'm sorry if it's a joke. Is it? Oh, it's a joke. Okay. So the other thing with borderline personality disorder, which is really interesting, is that is all you get. Yes. Okay. Thank you. The other thing with borderline personality disorder um, is oh, okay, it's all in your head. That would make more sense with the psychosis, though. I keep trying to tell people that I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. I can't. I'm bad with jokes. Literally, my friends they used to have this thing called a Luke joke because it was a joke that was bad. It just didn't make any sense. Um, so yeah. um, so the other thing with borderline personality disorder is a sense of identity. People with borderline personality disorder. I'm just going to call it BPD from now on because that's easier for me. So people with BPD will tend to feel a sense of fracturing or a lack of self, a lack of identity. They don't necessarily know who they are intrinsically. They essentially pick their identity from external factors. Now, all of us neurotypical people and people who don't have personality disorder tend to um, be able to identify what it is that we have inside us, right? We tend to be able to say, okay, um, this is my identity. This is who I am. This is what I like. This is what I don't like. This is a part of me. And we can also characterize ourselves by like verbs. So we can say I'm funny or I'm kind or stuff like that. That's a lot harder for people with borderline personality disorder, and therefore they feel like they need to externalize what their self is. They need to present it. Um, because they don't have a solid sense of self, they need to show people this is me. And they might do this by wearing kind of like more eclectic clothing. They might choose to change their hair color regularly, and it depends on what their mood they're in, is what hair color they'll choose. They might start to adopt the likes and um, uh, the things within their friendship group of what other people like, and take on other people's kind of like hobbies in their friendship group and social groups in order to actually um, identify themselves. Um, they may become obsessed with a certain thing um, in order to try and like use that as their identity. I'm a big Marvel fan, but I'm not obsessed with Marvel. I don't. I mean, I have Hulk fighting Certa over there, but like, I don't need to go out in a Marvel t-shirt every day. Um, and I think that they might become obsessed with a certain type of celebrity and try and emanate them. There's lots of different ways that their identity can be formed that's external and externalized. Um, and that really is like due to a sense of emptiness. They describe it as emptiness and a sense of lacking identity. And that is also part of the reason why they don't want people to leave them, because if those people leave them, if the people who they have around them who help them to form that identity leave, then part of their identity is gone. And being independent, completely independent, um, relies on you to have a sense of identity and a sense of self identity and who you are and who you are on your own in your own space. Um, and most people don't rely on other people. There's a difference between codependence and interdependence. So interdependence is where people will rely on each other, but in a healthy way. I can do it alone, but I'd rather do it with someone else. Yeah. Um, I could do this thing, but it's better if you do it. And you start to negotiate and you compromise and you have this really healthy kind of like relationship. And then codependence is where you absolutely just rely on each other. That's it. Now, people with emotional stable personality disorder will be codependent. They will just rely on other people to fulfill those needs for them, to fill in those gaps that they feel that they have. And that means that they have a really kind of like insecure attachment style, because if this person leaves, then that's gone. They can't function alone. And they might try and fill that gap with other people or try and win that person back through manipulative or nefarious tactics. And they may not be kind of aware that those things are manipulative, but then when you discuss it and break it down with them, they become aware, they realize. Um, and especially if they're in emotionally heightened spaces, that can be a really big factor. Um, so that's, essentially what somebody who has borderline personality disorder will look like. It's very kind of um, chaotic. It's very, it involves a lot of people. It can hurt a lot of people, and it causes a lot of disruption in that person's life. And that's why it's a disorder, because it causes disorder in their life. And that's how I kind of define disorder in my head. So Lone Wolf asks, do people with BPD manifest hypochondria, is that malingering, do you mean? Or maybe factitious disorders along with BPD? Yes, this is actually quite common. Um, what you tend to see is them adopting other, especially mental health conditions. Now, this is really important to note that BPD is often uh, comorbid. So comorbid just means there's other conditions that come along with it, with other conditions legitimately. So depression, anxiety, PTSD sometimes. So you do often get borderline personality disorder with other conditions. However, they also do feign or malinger in order to get that kind of because so for instance with the people that would come into the hospital, um, they would often feign these symptoms of other disorders in order to come into the hospital because they'd be cared for there. There'd be people around them showing them support, tending to them, looking after them, supporting them, being kind to them, right? And so, and they didn't have that in the what we call the community in their real life. So they'd get themselves admitted through tactics which involve saying they saw hallucinations or they're threatened to commit suicide, those kind of things. And Um, and then when it came in, it was clear to the psychiatrist after the assessment period that this person had borderline personality disorder, and often they get discharged quite quickly. And the reason for the quick discharge is because of the fact that we don't want people to become reliant on these very superficial, very obscure kind of like settings where the care is paid for and people are there to support you. But really, if that's the issue, you should be trying to find that in the community. You should be trying to find that in your home and in your relationships outside of that. So, not all trusts do, like NHS trusts, do follow that protocol where they discharge people quickly. But the psychiatrist that I worked with did, because she thought it was very important that we just try to provide them with some skills to manage their emotions and then for them to be on their way so that they don't become reliant on this system to back up and actually potentially cause them more harm. Because if one of those suicide attempts was to go wrong and they were to complete, well, that would be it, and that wasn't necessarily their intention. Their intention wasn't necessarily to actually complete. It was to get admitted, which is sad. It makes me sad thinking that people will go to that length just to get onto a mental health unit. It's not very pleasant to think about. And it was sad when I was working with those people, because it was very obvious to me that was the reason that they did it. Because a lot of these people, now trauma isn't necessarily a essential thing for EUPD or BPD. Those are interchangeable. It's not essential. What is essential is insecure attachment in the early years. So attachment is how we form bonds, and we kind of develop our attachment style as babies and as we're growing up into toddlers. And if that attachment is insecure, then it can develop into a personality disorder later in life. Essentially, it usually comes around adolescent, and trauma can exacerbate that. So trauma can make that worse, especially neglect can make that worse. But it's not essential. It's not like needed for it to be for BPD to manifest. So a lot of the people that we saw coming into units did have a lot of trauma. They had a lot of abusive relationships at the time that they were admitted. They had a lot of kind of like people. They were vulnerable. They had a lot of people who were manipulating them and who were taking advantage of them. Because somebody, if you think about it, somebody who has BPD, who always wants someone to be there, they're going to be more vulnerable to people taking advantage of that and getting away with abuse and getting away with bad behavior and things like cheating and stuff, because that person doesn't want to lose them. The person with BPD doesn't want to lose them. They don't want to be abandoned. So they're actually at a higher risk of being abused. But they're also at a higher risk of becoming abusers, because they also will resort to abusive behavior if they think that person is going to abandon them. So yeah, it's a double-edged sword, and certainly with the malingering stuff, that does happen quite a lot, and especially when people don't have a diagnosis yet, they don't know how to describe their feelings, because they're usually it gets confused with bipolar, because they're up and down, but they're up and down within kind of like reasonable ranges. Bipolar, the people with bipolar, when they're in a manic episode, might not sleep for days. They might go out and sell all their stuff. They might spend all their money. They might buy a plane ticket and go to a different country on a whim. That's kind of the level we're looking at. In depression, they might become quite catatonic. They might stay in bed for days. They might not eat for days, wash for days. So, those are quite extremes. Whereas someone with BPD, it's still like they might have emotional outbursts and then have quite low periods, but it's not the same kind of level, and not as periodic as what you see in bipolar. And that's how we differentiate it, psychologically speaking. So usually it gets mixed up with those people who experience it might label themselves as bipolar, because a lot of this, remember, someone who doesn't have a core identity, they need to find labels to catch on to. So they might say, oh, I think I have bipolar or autism. I've seen a lot of people with borderline personality disorder also claim that they're autistic, and that's why their social interactions don't work out very well, when actually none of the signs of autism are there. And actually it is this personality disorder instead. Are there instances of borderline personality disorder manifesting from severe drug abuse? We say amphetamines. I've heard of drug-induced paranoia. Could long periods of this just cause a fracture? So not necessarily. I think personality, if we think about personality as this thing that is quite prevalent throughout our life. So personality disorders develop when we're infants and then manifest in adolescence. So if it doesn't manifest in adolescence and it's triggered by something, it's not a personality disorder. It's more likely to be a neurotic disorder or something like that, like depression, anxiety, or drug-induced mania, or drug-induced depression, or drug-induced psychosis. Drugs can induce a lot of different types of disorders. I would say that what you're more likely to see is drug use from the person who has a personality disorder. So I think it's the other way around. So people with personality disorders are more likely to become substance abusers rather than the substance causing the personality disorder. And the reason for that is a lot of the time, if someone's having quite extreme emotional reactions, they might want to forget about those strong emotions because they feel strong. Like, this is the thing. Like, it may be in relation to something that's quite small or something like that that we don't we don't get. But they're feeling that emotion. That emotion is real. And so they might use substances in order to try and numb that a little bit or to forget about it. And actually, what you see that their behaviors increase, but it's just that they wake up from a long night of drinking or taking drugs and don't remember it, even though um, they uh, they were acting worse, because of the disinhibition that drugs and alcohol cause. The other thing that happens as well is that uh, drug abuse is caused because people with borderline personality disorder have very um, limited impulse control. So a lot of the behaviors that they do, because they lack impulse, they just act emotionally. They act on their emotions, their wants and needs at the time. Um, so it's harder for them to say no, essentially, in that situation where there's drugs, and because it makes them feel good, they'll go back to it rather than inhibiting their behavior and stopping themselves from doing it. So that's another reason why you might see drug and alcohol abuse in somebody with borderline personality disorder. That makes a lot of sense. So drugs use is a symptom of yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it's the same for other personality disorders. This kind of disinhibition, or with someone like something like narcissism, it might be that these drugs can't touch me because I'm too good, so I'm just going to take them, or but I'm above the law, so it doesn't matter. So there's various reasons for different personality disorders. But for borderline personality disorder, it's trying to manage your emotions and disinhibition and lack of impulse control. And that lack of impulse control can cause quite a lot of disruption because people will say things that they don't mean in the heat of a moment. They're more likely to just come out with stuff. They'll do things that they wouldn't normally do, and they're kind of like their ability to regulate will become more and more kind of like reduced as the situation escalates. Another real key factor in borderline personality disorder is lack of responsibility taking, and this comes from a sense of uh, essentially the individual feels that, well, they don't have an identity, and that can cause an issue with self-esteem because who am I? What do I have that's worth anything, right? And so if that's the case, then sorry, my phone just went off. If somebody feels like they don't have anything, any identity, then what you will have is you'll have this um, uh, lack of self-esteem essentially, and then any responsibility taking will break down what you already have, which is barely anything, and it will be a real problem. So you tend to find that people with borderline personality disorder will blame others. You triggered me, or you're the one that said that thing, and that's why I became angry or upset, or that's why I started smashing things up, or that's why I self harmed, or that's why I attempted to commit suicide, or something like that. And a lot of that is around um, not wanting to take responsibility for your own actions, putting the blame on other people, and that kind of serves a couple functions. One, it means that the ego isn't destroyed in any way. They can maintain their ego and the very little sense of self that they have. And the second reason is a tactic in order to maintain people in their life, keep people around. If they can blame other people, will feel guilty. They can then say, "Well, you have to stay with me. You owe me this." You know, you can't leave me after you just did that thing and that caused me to do this, right? So it can be used in a tactic that's a bit dodgy in that way. Um, is it possible to suffer these issues for short periods in a lifetime and recover without treatment, or is it like mental herpes and just flares up in cycles? You have a way with words, Lone Wolf. I would say it's more like the second one. Um, However, what I would say is that with treatment, somebody can absolutely live with BPD in a very kind of like safe way that doesn't cause much destruction, and it just takes the right treatment and patience on behalf of the people providing the treatment in order to make that work. The problem is the resources needed for it are for just one person are very intense, and it's a lot, and it has to be continuous because people will fall like uh you can't just do 6 sessions like they do with like CBT on the the NHS, and then expect someone with borderline personality disorder to take those sessions and just be fixed. It requires continuous input, continuous reflection, and a want to change on the part of the person. No, I would say that with any therapy. Any therapy will only work if the person who's undergoing the therapy has a desire to change. If you don't have that, then you don't have any therapeutic involvement. You can't change someone just by talking to them. They need to listen to it, process it, and put work in. Um, I always liken psychological therapy to physiotherapy as opposed to medicine, because in physiotherapy, you need to do day exercises. Like, I can't go to a physiotherapist and they're just going to, like, I don't know, like crack my back and I'll be fine again. Like, they're going to say, okay, you need to do these stretches 3 times a day or whatever. They give you a prescription for stretches. You need to go away and do that. And they'll be able to tell that you haven't done it. Now, that's much more like what psychological therapy is. You know, you go in, you hear what the person says, they ask you to try something, you go away, you try it, you practice it, and then you come back. And without that intermediate bit, without the work that you've put in, it won't work. And that's why people tend to um, say therapy is rubbish because they're not willing to put the work in. And if you did, then you'd see the difference. And that goes for all therapy. There's actually a stat that I heard a while ago, um, which basically said that, which said, it almost doesn't matter what therapy you go for. In a lot of cases, the biggest indicator of if therapy is going to work is the desire to change by the person undergoing the therapy. So, I could give you CAT, I could give you CBT, I could give you psychotherapy, I could give you counseling, I could give you any number of these things. If you don't have a desire to change, it won't work. Philip, hey, how you doing? Nice to have you here. I'm all on my lonesome, Philip. What's going on? I'm joking. So we're just talking about borderline personality disorder. We've covered some of the symptoms. We've covered some of the causes. We've covered some of well, we've started talking roughly about therapy, but yeah, we're doing good. I like the background. It's the like spacey stuff is cool. Um, and I am Joe. I can type his answers and reasons. I have so much power. So, borderline personality disorder, it's very complex, right? And no two people are the same. And this is the same for um, most therapeutic interventions. Therapeutic interventions. Most disorders, you meet two people who have the same disorder, exact same set of issues, and they're completely different people. So you have to address them differently, and it's the same. It's the exact same with borderline personality disorder. They have different wants, likes, needs, values, all this stuff, and you have to treat the individual. Um, However, you see similar symptomology amongst people. Um, so something that's really key, a really key part of the treatment, and this is kind of like a really interesting part because treatments try to be developed over a long period of time for borderline personality disorder, and a lot of people will say they're treatment resistant or treatment immune, which means that they can't be treated, but that's not true. Um, it just requires a lot of resources, as I said. But one thing that's kind of showing to be a bit promising is something called dialectical behavioral therapy. And what dialectical behavioral therapy tries to um, get to is um, there's a few different aspects of it, but a lot of it's about how somebody reacts in a situation that causes them distress. So, uh, whereas somebody with borderline personality disorder without treatment would normally flare up, would become highly emotional, they would potentially uh, become very stressed if somebody was leaving or if a relationship was ending, which happens to us all the time. Um, what they would actually do is learn how to manage those emotions and manage them at an earlier stage. So, because whenever we feel emotion, we don't go 0 to 0 straight away. There's a way in which we go. So there's a point where we could come back down, and then we hit a point where we're in crisis, where we're too angry to think, or where we're too upset to think, and then we come back down, and then we can also be de-escalated there. And it really puts the responsibility on the person to manage their emotions and not other people. And this is the real crux of it, because that's the whole thing with borderline personality disorder is not taking responsibility and not managing emotions. So if we can target those things, if we can say, look, whose responsibility is it to make sure that your emotions are managed? It's mine. Whose responsibility is it to make sure that whenever your emotions are not managed, you're acting in a way that is safe and is safe to other people as well? Well, it's mine. It's not anyone else's. Even if the thing that you're reacting to it triggers you, it's still your responsibility to react in a way. You can tell people you're upset. You can act upset, but you know, in order to be safe and in order to keep other people safe, you can't act in these ways anymore. And so it allows people to think about, what can they do to manage their emotions? Could they have um, some sort of sensory thing that distracts them or comforts them, like a nice blanket or something that they can look at, like following a mandala maze around with their eyes. Um, or could they um sorry, I'm just laughing. Or could they have something that grounds them in reality or like in the moment? So they might splash their face with cold water, ice cold water, or they might like having a stick band on their wrist, it helps to ground them, stuff like that. Could they distract themselves with something that they enjoy, like a film or like a video game or something, or go do something that enjoys them? Could they leave that situation that's causing them stress and find something else? Could they do some distress tolerance, like doing a punching bag or something like that? And do they have a crisis management plan if things go too far? If they get into a stage, do they have numbers to call and people to contact? And then all of that, I mean, this is just one part of it, but all of that, learning those skills will really help them when they're in those situations that trigger them, where the emotions become unstable. They'll then be able to manage their emotions in a better way. They'll be able to put stuff in place, and it's their responsibility to do it. And it really does help people over a long enough period of time to do that. Another way of doing another technique in dialectical behavioral therapy is radical acceptance, which is learning how to accept things for what they are, knowing that we can't change them, and people have other choices. People have choices that they can make, and we can't control that. So if somebody decides to leave us, we radically accept, I can't change anything about that. And you basically go through these questions: can I change it? How does it affect me? How can I move on from here? Essentially, and essentially the idea is just to accept that is something that's happened. The world doesn't bend to me, so I need to accept that that's the case. That I need to accept that that person's left. I need to accept that they don't want to be with me anymore. I need to accept that that my job is making me redundant. All these things that we can't control. Essentially, yeah, and that's a real key part about DBT, because a lot of the time when people's BPD's emotions are getting overwhelmed, it's because they're then trying to control that situation. They're trying to control it in a manipulative way. It causes distress to other people, when actually they should just allow that person to make that decision, because that person has agency and they can make that decision. They don't have to stick around if they don't want to. Yeah. And Philip says very stoic, and he's correct. Yeah, I think that is part of where radical acceptance comes from, is stoicism. And I know that Darren Brown in his books talks about this kind of similar idea that we can't control the world, so we have to allow these things. So yeah, I just want to point out there were no distractions in chat until Joe showed up. None at all. I agree. Um, it's Philip's fault. Everyone agrees. Everyone agrees it's Philip's fault. Even Philip agrees. I don't know who this Davidian is, but he has a problem with Joe. Everyone fight him. Protect Joe's reputation. Oh. So yeah, so that's like the treatment, the main treatment for emotionally unstable personality disorder. CBT doesn't really do anything, because CBT is all about changing cognitions and changing behavior. And it's really hard to change cognitions when we're in like a state of distress or a state of fight, flight, freeze, because we can change our cognitions when we're. The thing that I guess you could do is you could try and change the cognitions around the triggers, the thought process around the triggers, but it doesn't really change the behavior in that state. So DBT kind of targets the behavior before it gets to that state, which is good, because that's what you need. Now, that's the main kind of DBT kind of style stuff. It's mainly emotion regulate, urge management as well, because a lot of impulse control stuff is problematic. So people with BPD have lack of impulse control, and that can um, cause some real issues. With like impulsive thoughts and acts, um, including intrusive thoughts. Um, and there's this thing called urge management. So there's something very basic called like the 15-minute rule, which is essentially that you wait 15 minutes after you get an urge before um, do anything. You can kind of go distract yourself with something that is opposing the urge. So if you have an urge to, I don't know, shout at someone, you might go listen to some calm music, and then if you still have the urge after 15 minutes, you wait another 15 minutes. And that is really kind of like a very basic technique in order to try and minimize impulses. Um, Joe does have a lack of impulse control. Yeah. Joe has a lack of impulse control. I think the benefit I have is I can just show whatever comments I have and take them out of context. Another one is the stop sign. So it's literally a sign that says stop, but it's got two P's, and it means stop, think. So stop what you're doing, think about your intentions and what you're going through, observe your physical feelings, and then, oh God, I should have thought about this before I brought it up. Dave's not here. Dave isn't here though. Where is Dave? Who knows? I'm gonna Google stop DPT quickly because I feel like I've just promised something to you, and oh, there's two Daves. Who knew? Who knew? Stop, take a breath, observe, pull back, put in some perspective, and then practice what works and proceed. Yeah, that's it. I was thinking of Dave, Trolley Dave. Dave, man. There was another DBT thing that I just thought of as well, actually. Have a look. Oh, mindfulness, of course, mindfulness. Mindfulness is, um, in essence, a DBT strategy. It's kind of like one that's like an addendum. It's not a DBT in itself, but it's used in DBT to kind of reinforce it. And I just want to dispel some myths around mindfulness. DBT is dialectical behavioral therapy. Joe, you should know this. Oh my goodness. How dare you? It's not database tables. Mindfulness is not this magical meditation thing that people want it to be. It's been kind of co-opted by people who are like new, what are they called? Um, New Age spiritualists, to be this magical thing that is just gonna like fix everything. But what it really is it's just about, so we have anxiety about things that we've done in the past and like guilt and stress from the past. We have anxiety about things that are going to happen in the future, um, about things that are going to um, potentially stress us out, things that may or may not happen. Maybe we have a meeting, maybe we're just worrying about what we're going to do when we get old. These anxieties from the past, and we're normally thinking about these things because we're planning for the future, and we're normally thinking about what we did, whether we messed up at that party or whatever. Now, what mindfulness aims to do is just bring you to a place of the present, and just to live in the present for a little bit, to forget about those things, because usually, normally, not all the time, but in the present, normally there isn't any stress. Yeah, unless you're in an interview or something like that. Normally, there isn't any actual things to stress you out right now. Normally, it's I've got to do this thing in the future, or I did this thing in the past. And if you just take a few minutes to just think about the present, focus on your breathing, focus on any of the activities you're doing right at that moment, and not consider anything from the future or the past. Allow thoughts to go into your head. So you're not trying to cut your thoughts off. You're trying to observe them from, like, I like to imagine like a pane of glass, and just like my thoughts are going by on the other side of the glass, and I can see them, but they're not affecting me. Yeah, then, because usually our thoughts are quite intrusive. They just come out of nowhere. They're not actually generated by us. Um, and that just allows you to have a little bit of peacefulness, a little bit of like realization that actually right now is okay, right now is fine. And you can really do this creatively. Like, you could go for a walk and just focus on the sounds that you have, the sounds that are going on, the things that you're seeing, the things you're smelling. That you can just really kind of like break down and just observe your thoughts non-judgmentally, and try and allow them to go away. And it just gives you a sense of peacefulness just for a short bit of time, and reduces those anxiety levels, and reduces those emotional levels, because we're always just in a state of stress. We're always just in a state of like, I need to do this next, I need to do this next. And sometimes it's okay to just be okay. I'm gonna be present in the moment. Yeah. I think he's stressing me out, insisting that nothing should be stressing me out. Oh, I'm sorry. I can't help that. But right now, if you think about it, right now, there's nothing to stress you out right now, right this second. You can just exist peacefully in the moment, observe your thoughts. Yeah. That's it. That's essentially mindfulness, right? And then all these new age spiritualists, like, oh, it allows you to connect with your highest consciousness, a higher level of your consciousness. Um, oh yeah, it allowed me to observe my inner mind, or observe this, or observe that. And it's like, it doesn't need to be that complicated. It doesn't need to be this thing you access. It's just not being concerned about anything that isn't affecting you right now. Yeah, that's essentially it. And I think it works for that. I've seen a lot of people adopt it, and it works for them. Some people it doesn't work for. I would say the people that it doesn't work for the most are people with ADHD. um, because it's really hard for people with ADHD to keep track of their thoughts anyway. So just to try and like observe their thoughts, it would just be distracting, and it would be too much. So I think ADHD is probably one of the things I would say it doesn't necessarily help. I think it could help, but it's harder for those people to actually do it. Um, and that's okay. Not everything has to work for everyone. You need to find the thing that works for you. But that is used in BPD to help people to ground themselves, and to take a moment to think about, actually, what am I reacting to, where are these thoughts coming from, and break that down a little bit. So yeah. So just want to know, is there any questions from the chat? I know that Joe. Oh, I clicked on the wrong one. Joe would like a present. So if anyone wants to give Joe a present, then feel free. Maybe a few more subscribers. That would be nice. To answers and reasons, this is Joe. He switched over so that people didn't. Joe also has ADHD, so he knew I was talking about it. My brain is defective. Nothing works. Something will work, Joe. You just need to find where it is. This reminds me of the AA moniker. 1 minute leads to an hour, leads to a day, and every day is another opportunity to take things minute by minute. Yeah, that's essentially it. It's about. I mean, I think AA has an issue. There's lots of people that I work with who have tried AA, and they can't do it because they don't believe in a higher power. And what AA tries to get you to do is to try and work for, essentially, for that higher power's purpose. We're serving the function of this higher purpose. We need to find it. It's bigger than us. It's not us. It's not our personal purpose, and that's how they try and get people to do it. And people struggle with that if they don't believe in God. Now, I think that you could do that without God. You could think about higher purposes such as family, or higher purposes such as society, or stuff like that. But it doesn't really hold the same gravitas as an all-powerful being. But the idea here is very much similar. If you can focus yourself just on the present for a minute, then it will give you the peace of mind to be able to function in the next section. And actually, it can be used as a really good urge management strategy. If you're having an urge, going into a mindful state, getting through that urge, and then getting out the other side. And as I said, it doesn't have to be anything. You could be doing things whilst you're doing mindfulness. It doesn't have to be meditation. It can be, making a drink, or making food is a really good way of being mindful. You just focus on the food that you're making, focus on the ingredients, the smells, the taste. You really focus on what you're doing. Every action you're doing, you do it with intention. A lot of us do things mindlessly, which is, and that's the opposite of mindfulness. So we might grab things and be clumsy and stuff. Whereas when you're being mindful, everything's intentional. You're really focusing on your actions and what you're doing, and how you're doing it, and the experience you're having whilst you're doing it, and try and stay in that um, moment, which is good. I think that's a good way of doing it, and I think a lot of people need to do that, because a lot of people get lost in the including myself, just get lost in this cascade of life, and you don't really take time to just focus on what you're doing at that moment. It's all a rush. I'm not saying AA values. I'm just saying it sounds like they borrow actual therapeutic axioms. They do. I mean, AA is effective. If it wasn't effective, it wouldn't be around anymore. It uses strategies that are known to improve behavior, and especially addictive behavior. Particularly, that giving someone peer support, that's really effective in all kinds of therapy. Having someone there to help you out, and group therapies are really good, actually, because a lot of people think when they go to a group therapy that it's not going to be very helpful, because they're just going to hit other people's issues and it's going to trigger them. Actually, you have a support network then of people who have gone through the same stuff as you, and they're there to help you, and they want to change as well. So providing that they do actually want to change, and there's not someone there to manipulate or derail that experience, you're going to get a good outcome with having multiple people talking about their experiences. And the only issue with it is that kind of that higher power element of it, which if you can't connect to that, everything else falls down, because it relies on that. Like, we're doing it for this higher power aspect. And there are other interventions that don't use that work just as effectively. But because they base their entire model on it, it kind of like, if it doesn't work, then the whole thing won't work. So I said, is there any questions? And Joe's asked, yeah, what is borderline personality disorder? Is this going to be a theme whenever I get like towards the end or like the middle? You're just going to ask me what is the thing you're talking about? So in terms of how you can help someone with personality disorder, I think that's a really key thing, because we're not going to be able to deliver therapy. We're not going to be able to necessarily know the strategies that we need to put in place, or have the therapeutic relationships that is required to do that kind of work, give people the right information and techniques and coping strategies. So how could you help someone? Well, there's a few different ways. One thing is by helping them to develop good communication with you, so that they can tell you how they're actually feeling and not resort to action in order for them to externalize how they're feeling, right? Which is what you tend to find, is that they don't necessarily have the words or the way to describe it. So what they'll do is they'll externalize it, and they'll try and show you through action what they're feeling, rather than telling you. So giving them those words and permission to use words instead of action is a really good way of doing it. So call me up, tell me how you're feeling. I want a description of the physical feelings and the words that you'd use to describe the emotion. And that's what, validating them in positive ways when they're in positive moods is really key as well. So telling them, you care for them and that you love them if you love them, or that you want to hang around with them or stuff like that. Um, and Lone Wolf disrupting everything again. So just to wrap up and clarify, what we've established is the conversation today is to be a professional psychologist, you need to regularly take mushrooms and only do acid on the weekends, right? I mean, exactly. So tell people. Oh God. Um, where was I? Guys, you need to inform people of their, yeah, give them validation when they're in a positive mood. A lot of the time when people are in good moods, we ignore them. And then when they're in bad moods, that's when we pay attention. Like someone might seem happy and we'll just let them be happy. And then when they're upset, we'll attend to them and we'll look after them, we'll care for them. And with people with borderline personality disorder, you almost have to do that the other way around. You have to kind of give them the care and attention when they're happy, and not ignore them, but don't don't engage in the behavior too much with them. Do as minimal as you can, and that's going to feel really uncomfortable. It's going to feel really uh, disconcerting, and you're not going to feel like a very good person for doing it. But honestly, if they learn that they're not going to get that kind of even on a subconscious level, they're not going to get that validation or that sense of it's like someone's caring for them. If they act in that way, then they won't do it. They'll find a different way of asking, and usually they'll ask when they're in a positive mood if you're reinforcing that. And it feels a bit manipulative that we're trying to get people to act in a way that we want them to act, but we have to do it to protect ourselves as much as the other person. Because if someone's learning that they can get that validation through that method, then they'll repeat it and they'll repeat it and they'll repeat it, and it'll become a cycle and it'll become unmanageable. And that's when you get these really big ruptures in relationships where people just don't want to see them anymore. And then their sense of abandonment, their feeling like people do abandon them, is validated, and then they feel like they're justified in acting that way again, or even escalating it even further in order to try and keep people around again. Yeah, and that's where we get really problematic behaviors. So doing as minimal as possible. If someone is at risk of their health, then you engage it to the point where you are looking after their health, but you kind of withdraw from the emotional aspect and then give that to them when they've improved their mood again. Yeah, and it really feels bad, but it needs to happen. You need to do it that way. Um, and show people that you care for them when they're in positive moods. And this is the thing, like, practically that's very difficult to do because you want to look after people in your life and you want to show you that you care, especially after they've gone through something traumatic, and those situations are traumatic. But if you don't want it to repeat, then there needs to be a line that you draw with yourself, that you have a boundary and they can't push it, and you will help them, but only to the point where um it's safe for them, and then you'll withdraw until you can reinforce them when they're being more positive. Yeah, that's a real key thing. Um, the other thing I would say about supporting someone with BPD is um, make sure you have clear boundaries and that they stick to them. Because people with borderline personality disorder might call people in the middle of the night. They might uh, ask people to come out for things that are quite innocuous. Come and see me. Um, they might struggle with work. So you need to have your boundaries in place, your life boundaries, and then they need to meet those things, right? So they need to uh, if they're calling in the middle of the night, you need to say, I can't take calls in the middle of the night. You're gonna have to call me in the morning. Yeah. Or if they want you to come out, you say, look, I can't come out. I've got these things to do. Yeah. If you want to meet me, you can come to me. Or something like that. Have these boundaries in place that are unbreakable, they can't cross them. They might try and cross them with other people, and if other people allow that, that's kind of okay. That's not really your issue at that point, because you've got to look after yourself, and you can if they're close people as well that they're trying to cross boundaries with, reinforce them. We need to have boundaries with this person. We need to make sure that we're not allowing them to influence us too much, because it can cause a lot of chaos in many people's lives, people in that person's life. So you need to make sure that you're strict. And that doesn't mean you can't like do things for that person or like care for them. It just means that you are protecting yourself and that they're contacting the right people. Because if there is a genuine emergency and they need support in a night, you're not the one they should be contacting. They should be contacting the emergency services. Yeah, and if they do contact the emergency services and it's not an emergency, then that's their responsibility. They're going to get in trouble for that, or they're going to get, the emergency services are going to become frustrated with them essentially. So it's about balancing it, making sure you're protecting yourself, because that's the best way of protecting them at the same time. Yeah, and if you think there's a real risk to their health, including their mental health and maybe their physical health, that maybe they're having some suicidal thoughts or whatever, contact emergency services or contact their GP or someone. Contact anyone, because really, you're not. Most people aren't experts in mental health. Most people don't know how to handle those situations. You'll try and get lured into it, but just be boundaried with it, because you've got to protect yourself. Yeah. So that's the key. There you go. And really, the emergency services are set up for that very reason. They're set up in order to protect people. So they'll know better what they're doing than you. Yeah. Okay. Is there any questions? Because I think I've reached the end of my thing. My partner's outside in the garden with her friend, who I'm just waving at. So I don't have anything. I think I've gone through everything. Haven't I? Joe, what else? What have I missed? Joe, what have I missed? Don't you dare say what is borderline personality disorder. What I'd love to see is if you do have any questions, then please just put them in the chat below, or in the comment section, and I'll answer them, or Joe will get me to answer them. Yeah, and it'll be cool. And if you want to discuss any more personality disorders, let me know. Or if there's anything specifically around psychology that you're interested in that you want me to talk about, then feel free. And as I say, I hope I'm going to get some guests on at some point. That'll be really good to get some sort of guest to come and chat with us. Maybe a fully qualified psychologist, or someone who's experienced mental health difficulties in a various area. I also want to get into some of the kind of unethical, like creepypasta type. They're not actual creepypastas, but they're real. They actually happened. Some of the psychological studies from the 80s and 70s, which were horrifying, and just discuss some of those just out of morbid curiosity. I'm sure those will be very interesting, and what we learned from those studies. And actually, like one in particular, I think I want to discuss is the Stanford Prison Experiment, because it's kind of gone down in mythology, and maybe it's not as strong as people think it is. And I think that would be really interesting. What is personality? That is a big question. That is a whole question for another stream, because personality is pretty tough to define, actually. So I'm going to do that on a stream at some point. Joe, I think that's a good question. Let me put it up on the screen to remind me. What is personality? So if there's no further thoughts, the most dangerous personality disorders. So we can talk about this in another stream as well, actually. There's a thing called the dark triad, which is antisocial personality, narcissism, and psychopathy. No, is it? Do you know what? This is going to be that type of show where the host, who's supposed to know all the information, has to do Googling live on narcissism, Machiavellianism. That's it. Machiavellianism, narcissism, and psychopathy. And those three things together are called the dark triad. That's the most dangerous type of personality that you can have. But we can talk about that more on another show as well. These are all good. Yeah, these are good show ideas, Joe. These aren't things I can answer in 1 minute as I'm finishing up, but we can certainly expand on these in future shows. Maybe I'll do a poll on Twitter. Yeah, that's good. This is a really good point. This is something I'm very passionate about, actually. So I'm looking forward to this one. Philip, do you have any questions? Philip, do you have any questions? But yeah, if that's everything, guys, this has been a pleasure to do. Hopefully, I'll have someone with me. The air guys are all usually busy around this time, so I don't expect any of them to join me. But I might have some guests coming up. Air guys, if possible. And yeah, this is a fortnightly stream, so we won't be back next Monday, but we'll be back the Monday afterwards, 7 o'clock till about 8:30ish, maybe a bit earlier, depending on who I have with me. But we covered everything pretty quickly today, which is quite good. I got through the stuff I wanted to discuss sooner than I thought I would. And now my screen's just come up with something, and I don't know what it is. I can't get rid of it. But yeah, I think it's been fun, and I hope you've enjoyed it. And yeah, if you haven't already, on your way out, subscribe. Joe will be very happy with you. We want to get to those super chat buttons so that we can do some super chats. So that he can do some super chats. And on tomorrow, there is a stream. Joe, what's your stream on tomorrow? Tell me in the chat and I'll put it on the screen. Quickly now. Tell me the stream for Thursday as well, so I can share it with people. There's a couple of streams happening this week. I'm sure Joe will tell me in a moment, but he's not responding right now. So yeah, make sure you tune in to Answers in Reason. That's this channel for your regular sci-fi show on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 9 o'clock. There might be a Plato's Rave before them, which are very fun, where Joe does some of his mixing, and he's very good at DJing. So don't miss that either. If you want to have a little bit of music on in the background whilst you do something before the show, and make sure you tune in. These guys are so funny. I've not been as funny this stream because I don't have these guys to bounce off of, so apologies for that. And next week we have indoctrination with Rev and Philip, which will be good because Rev comes from a Christian Science background, so he'll be able to discuss about his experience with that. And Philip is Italian, so he's been indoctrinated into these ideas about limited food options around what you can put on pizzas and stuff. So he'll be able to talk about that. And yeah, so have a good night, everyone. I'm going to wrap this up now, and stay mentally well. And yeah, have a good evening. Bye.